Think about the last song you heard on the radio, crystal clear, static-free. That's FM. It's so normal now, it's almost invisible. It's the soundtrack to our morning commute, the background noise in a workshop, the voice that keeps us company on a long drive. We take its clarity for granted, like running water or electricity. We just expect it to be there, a constant, reliable stream of sound. But it wasn't always this way. Before this pristine audio experience, there was AM radio. Remember that sound? The crackle and hiss, the way a signal could fade in and out, battling with atmospheric interference, thunderstorms, even the hum of nearby power lines. For decades, that was the sound of broadcasting. So when FM arrived, its silence, the absence of all that noise, was as revolutionary as the sound itself. But what if I told you there was a time when broadcasting on FM wasn't just difficult? It was practically an act of rebellion? That to get this clarity, people had to break the rules? I've been down the rabbit hole on this one. And the story isn't just about better sound, it's about control. About who gets to speak and who gets to decide what we hear. It's a battle over the very air we breathe. A fight for a slice of the invisible electromagnetic spectrum. The gatekeepers of the time weren't just choosing which songs to play, they were shaping public discourse, defining what was considered mainstream culture, and protecting a vast, profitable empire built on old, inferior technology. This is a story about how a brilliant invention was nearly buried, and how a handful of outlaws resurrected it. It all starts with a brilliant, tragic man named Edwin Armstrong. A true genius, a relentless tinkerer from a young age, Armstrong was the quintessential inventor. He invented FM broadcasting in the 1930s, and it was leagues better than AM. It rejected static. It carried music with a fidelity that AM could only dream of. Imagine hearing a full orchestra on the radio for the first time, not as a muddy, compressed wall of sound, but with each instrument distinct and vibrant. That was the promise of FM. But Armstrong didn't just face technical challenges. He faced a wall of powerful interests. You see, the established radio networks, the big AM broadcasters, they had built empires on the old technology. Their towers, their licenses, their business models, all AM. They had invested millions in a nationwide infrastructure that FM threatened to turn into a collection of scrap metal. FM wasn't just a new feature, it was a fundamental disruption. It required new transmitters, new receivers for every home, and a complete rethinking of how radio worked. To them, Armstrong's perfect sound was the thunderclap signaling an approaching storm. Historical accounts describe a period of intense corporate and legal pressure. The campaign against Armstrong was led by a man who was once his ally and patron, David Sarnoff, the head of RCA. Sarnoff saw the future, but it was a future he wanted to control. RCA had massive investments in AM radio, and was also pouring resources into the development of television. FM was a brilliant but inconvenient distraction that threatened both. So, Armstrong's own partner, RCA, famously suppressed the technology to protect its AM investments. They lobbied the FCC, tied Armstrong up in endless, draining patent lawsuits, and used their immense power to shift the allocated FM frequency band, instantly rendering all of Armstrong's existing equipment obsolete. It was a classic case of a better idea being fought, not because it didn't work, but because it worked too well. The corporate machine was determined to crush the lone inventor. Tragically, worn down by decades of legal battles and seeing his life's work stifled, Edwin Armstrong took his own life in 1954, never living to see his invention triumph. This is where our story takes a fascinating turn. Into the shadows. With the inventor gone and the corporations looking the other way, FM radio became a ghost, a technology in limbo. The frequency band sat there, mostly silent, a vast, empty frontier in the middle of the bustling radio dial. But nature, and technology, abhors a vacuum. Because while the big players were trying to strangle FM in its crib, other people saw its potential, and they weren't playing by the rules. In the post-war period, especially in the 1960s and 70s, a new generation was coming of age, a generation disillusioned with the mainstream, hungry for new sounds, new ideas, and a voice of their own. For this certain breed of renegade, the hobbyists, the electronics geeks, the campus radicals, the music fanatics, the unused high-frequency FM band was a frontier, a blank space on the dial, ripe for the taking. It was an opportunity to build something new, completely outside the system. These were the pirate broadcasters, not pirates on the sea, but pirates in the attic, in the van, on the hilltop. They were the spiritual descendants of Armstrong, tinkerers armed with soldering irons and a rebellious spirit. They built transmitters from scavenged parts, using schematics passed around in underground magazines. Their studios were bedrooms and basements, soundproofed with egg cartons and blankets. Their broadcast antennas were wires strung up on rooftops or hidden in trees. And with a flick of a switch, they started broadcasting, hijacking the airwaves to create their own media universe. And what they broadcast was a revelation. They played music the mainstream stations wouldn't touch. The sprawling 10-minute guitar solos of psychedelic rock, the raw 3-chord fury of early punk, the complex improvisations of experimental jazz. They would play an entire album side without interruption, honoring the artist's intent in a way commercial radio, with its rigid 3-minute song limit and constant ad breaks, never could. For the first time, listeners could hear this music in glorious, static-free stereo, the way it was meant to be heard. But it wasn't just about the music. They talked about things the big networks ignored. They became the voice of the counterculture. They discussed anti-war protests, civil rights, and feminist ideas. They read poetry, performed radio dramas, and announced local events that were invisible to the mainstream media. They were, in essence, the internet of their day. A decentralized network of voices providing an alternative to the polished, controlled narrative of corporate broadcasting. They offered community news, radical politics, local culture. They gave a platform to the voiceless. It was chaotic, it was illegal, and it was also wildly popular, especially with young people. Listeners would eagerly scan the dial, hoping to find these fleeting phantom stations. But this rebellion did not go unnoticed. The FCC, the federal agency in charge of regulating the airwaves, saw them as a menace, interfering with licensed broadcasts and operating outside the law. The broadcast police would hunt them. They used direction-finding equipment to triangulate a signal's origin. There were tales of raids, of broadcasters quickly shutting down when a suspicious car appeared, of moving transmitters every night to stay ahead of the authorities. It was a high-stakes cat-and-mouse game played out over the public airwaves, with the pirates risking hefty fines and equipment confiscation for a few hours of freedom on the air. This period, this FM revolution, did something profound. It proved there was a hunger, a real public hunger, for the diversity and quality that FM could offer. Every listener who tuned in, every person who discovered a new band or a new idea on a pirate station, was a data point. The pirates, however illicit, were the proof of concept. They demonstrated that the audience for album-oriented rock, for niche genres, for in-depth community talk, was not just a tiny fringe. It was a massive, underserved market. They created the audience that the big, cautious networks were too scared to cultivate. They tilled the soil and planted the seeds of a new audio landscape. Eventually, the dam broke. The pressure from the public, combined with the undeniable evidence created by the pirates, became too much for the establishment to ignore. The FCC changed its policies, most notably with the non-duplication rule of 1964, which limited how much AM content could be simulcast on co-owned FM stations, forcing them to create original programming. They began allocating more space on the dial for FM, opening the door for new, legal stations. The big networks, seeing the pirates' success and the changing consumer demand for high-fidelity stereo sound, finally embraced the technology they had once fought. The very corporations that had suppressed FM now scrambled to catch up, launching their own FM stations to capture this new, lucrative audience. By the late 1970s and 80s, FM became the new mainstream. The format the pirates had pioneered, album-oriented rock, or AOR, dominated the airwaves. The revolution had been televised, or in this case, broadcast. The pirates were either shut down or they went legit, using their technical skills and passion for radio to become the founders of some of our first public and college radio stations. These new, legal stations carried the torch of the pirate ethos, providing a permanent home for the kind of diverse and adventurous programming that had once been a criminal act. So the next time you spin the dial and land on a crystal-clear classic rock station or an independent public radio voice, remember this hidden history. That clarity wasn't just given, it was fought for. It was born in the mind of a tragic genius, suppressed by corporate greed, and then smuggled onto the airwaves by inventors who wouldn't quit, and renegades who wouldn't be silent. The sound you hear is an echo of their rebellion. They broke the rules to make a new world of sound, and in doing so, they changed what we all get to hear. The battle for the airwaves never truly ends. It just changes form. Today, the fight for a diverse and open media landscape continues on podcasts, streaming platforms, and the internet. The spirit of the FM pirates lives on. Which part of this forgotten technological revolution do you find more compelling? The corporate battle to suppress FM or the renegade pirate broadcasters who brought it to the people? Let me know your thoughts below. Disclaimer. This video presents historical context only. It does not encourage building or operating unlicensed transmitters. Always follow local laws and licensing requirements when using radio equipment.